Okay, so now we're actually recording. Hello. So I'm Joe Glines, and I'm out of Dallas, Texas, and I've been using AutoHotkey for, I don't know, like 8 years or somewhere in there. I have no idea. And I'm not a programmer. I just love saving time, and AutoHotkey it's my main tool. I use other tools, but it's by far the main tool I use, and I use it wherever I can to simplify my life. And my co-host here, Jackie, why don't you introduce
Hey,
yourself?
yeah, I'm Jack, and I've been using our hotkey for between 4 and 5 years, perhaps. I think something like that.
Longer than that. We've been
Mm,
talking now for two and
yeah,
a half.
I believe that I started in February of 2012, so that would be just above 5 years. Yeah. Okay, so 5 years. Let's keep it at that. So for 5 years, I've been using our hotkey now. And I use it just like you, Joe, to kind of speed up my work and solve all kinds of problems. I love solving all types of different computing problems with AutoHotkey. And that is my main tool. I've dabbed in others as well, but yeah, AutoHotkey is the go-to one.
It's interesting. I got an email from someone asking for some thoughts the other day, and they had the exact same. I mean, literally the exact same experience I had at when I was working at corporate company, and it was the boss was worried. In his case, he was worried that that he might quit, and that no one else there knew AutoHotkey, and that like you're doing all this stuff in AutoHotkey, and then if you leave, no one knows it. Right. My case, which was exactly the same, was my boss said, what if you get hit by a truck? Right.
Yeah,
But both of our bosses said, why don't you do it all in Python? Start using Python instead of AutoHotkey.
yeah,
And I'm like, I went through this whole thing of like, yeah, I did that for like a year. I learned Python, and everything I would do in AutoHotkey, I would take 10 times longer to do it in Python, and it would work. But then I'm like, finally realized, why am I doing this? It's just ridiculous.
yeah, yeah. I'd say I looked at Python as well because it's a more known scripted language and stuff like that. So I was also like, hey, maybe I should do that because there's job offerings for
That's
people
right.
who know Python and stuff
Yeah.
like that. But each time I had a problem, I solved it with our hotkey, and I was kind of like, oh, I should try and solve this with Python. And before I ended up actually solving it, I was on to the next thing
Yeah.
because I'd already solved in what
Right.
I knew. So,
Right.
so yeah, the tool needs to fit the nail or whatever you call that.
And
So
and
as long
your
as
skill set too, right? I mean, it's if you can get it done and you know it well. Hey, the other one that I said in that email was, look, anyone else can look at AutoHotkey code. If they're a programmer, they can easily update it and tweak it. It's not a big deal to, they're not going to write something from scratch in it, but they can easily modify it if they're a programmer. It's easy to find.
yeah, I would say a lot of the programmers that are already in our community, they bitch and moan about different quirks of AutoHotkey. And of
Yeah,
course, they're right. Some of
sure.
the stuff is weird to you as a programmer because it doesn't make sense in a strictly written way. But to someone who hasn't seen any other languages, that's the rules that they have learned.
Yeah,
And some of it makes it simple and some of it makes it complicated. But compared to other languages where you need to learn almost the complete rule set before you begin, it just has such a small learning curve compared to them.
yeah, agreed.
So before you start with C, you need to read these 6 books before, or
Ah,
else you'll just get compile errors all the way or something like that.
yeah,
Where AutoHotkey is just a little simpler.
yeah. I think let's get into this because I think what we're talking about is going to come up near the end when we talk about um, making money with AutoHotkey and getting jobs and stuff because it is on that topic. But
Sure.
so if we had 64 registrants, which is great. Again, we start off muted just because it looks like I'm going to guess we have around 15. It looks like
Mm-hmm.
on right now, and if everyone tried to talk at the same time, it would just be crazy. So we just start off muted. After the first hour, we'll unmute people if you want. You can ask questions, but there's a chat. You can always raise your hand or go into the chat and ask questions. Um, So just bear with us. All right. So one thing we do is we have a script highlight. So this function, which is called FindText, which do not, for whatever, don't think about it as finding text, even though that's the name of the function. It'll find any sort of a pattern on your screen, like image search. Is it image search or source?
Yeah, search. Yeah.
Okay. I don't use it. I've seen it. It's very similar to it in that sense, but it's super easy to use. And so here, I'm going to fire up the overall script. And so it's kind of weird. It's not too intuitive when you first look at it. Let me show you. I mean, this part is, I can say capture, and this little red thing, let's say I wanted to find this this PT area, right? And now see that there, I can tighten it up. I can even say, let me, you know what, I really want the P and the T only. Okay, now here's the thing that like doesn't make sense to me is like you have your choice of either hitting color or grayscale. I'm simplifying things a lot here just to get an example. So okay, that's what it's going to look for, and I'm gonna say my PT example. This is just to give me something to remind myself what it is. I hit OK, and now when I click here, it converted that area to underscores and O's, right? And this is what it looks like. I should have done something that actually you can see it here in the FindText. These two, was what this thing found, right? And what's awesome is I can hit test, and it's going to say, oh, look, it found it. And when I hit OK, watch my mouse. So see, it moved right up to there. It went right back to where it was, right? And then all I would have to do is say, after you get to that spot, click, right-click, do whatever you want. Send some text, click in there and send some text. So the beauty about this is you don't have to have the image file on your computer, right? It converts it into like this type of code that you then just have in your code. You don't need the file. So it's a super easy way to do like image search your screen. You can also specify where you want it to search, everywhere, or just a certain area. But it's really easy to use. I made a couple videos. Again, I didn't mention this earlier, but I'll send out the resources after. So this deck will be in there with all these links. It's on the forum. But I made a couple tutorials because, again, the tool I think is well designed. It's just a complex topic, and so when you're first opening up, it's confusing. But it's a really cool tool. Jackie, I know you've done a lot more with image search than I have.
Yeah, and you showed me this some time ago now, and I was kind of like, but how is it doing it? And it is very simple. It's simply converting whatever you capture into ones and zeros, let's put it like that. So it works quite reliably. And as you said yourself, Joe, you don't need to share any type of image or any type of extra stuff. So if you're just looking for a simple pattern, again, it can't do a lot of colors. It can only do, let's say, black and white or grayscale, as you showed yourself, Joe. So it has a limitation there.
But I mean, the things can still have colors. It's just going to look for the patterns, right? So
yeah,
depending
exactly.
on things that have similar colors next to each other, that might be harder, right?
Yeah. If you have a red H compared to a green H, it wouldn't be able to differentiate between them. It would just be able to find an H. Yeah. So but other than that, it is, as it says here, FindText, which is a very good example, because text is normally always contrasted in a good way. So
yeah. So that was our script highlight, which was like I said, typically when I'm doing stuff in especially web scraping and I run into issues. And this, I'm like, you know what? This is probably going to turn into my go-to when I can't solve my issue with web scraping easily, because I think on average, it'll probably work pretty reliably versus sending controls or what the DLL calls and clicking. I forget what they're even called. Not commands. What are they called? The labels and objects and stuff, which
Oh, I'm sorry. I can't really follow what you're looking for.
It's okay. I was just thinking about the not. It doesn't matter, but
Yeah.
there are other ways, of course, with AutoHotkey to connect to programs, right?
Yeah.
And this one, at least for what I've done so far, was like it worked really reliably. So I'm like, you know what, this is fine for me.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
moving on. So
Absolutely.
I found a few of us had a call with Tank Charlie. Is it Simmons? Simmons?
Simmons.
And he actually works in robotic process automation type things where they go in at, he works for a company where they have people come out and spend $2,000 a day to have a client on site, or sorry, the vendor on site working for them, automating processes, and that might be even 2 weeks. So it's big dollars, right? But he had posted some topics on the forum about robotics process automation, and it's kind of overall a decent summary of what AutoHotkey is doing. It's just, to me, I just kind of think of it as taking it to the next level where you're logging everything. You're doing a lot more tracking on who's doing what. And for the most part, you're automating, not always, but more likely end to end, the entire process where, let's say you had 10 people doing this. Now you'll have one doing it part-time, right?
Yeah.
That's a quick summary of what, to me, the difference between robotic process automation versus the stuff I do with AutoHotkey. I can streamline a smaller process really quickly and easily, but I'm rarely making it this elaborate, or I'm taking all these different processes and automating the entire process. Not that you couldn't use it, but anyway, in that discussion, we were talking about robotics process automation, and I did some research on it, and I found down here there's a slide deck in a podcast where they talk through stuff. It was an interesting conversation between the two authors of this book, talking about where it's going and some of the pitfalls of automation and some of the confusion. And this was one graph, even though it's not AutoHotkey stuff, it kind of still gives an idea. They had asked people which best describes your organization's current RPA adoption level. And out of 108 respondents, right, there were a small percentage, 7%, that basically said, we looked at it, we're not doing it, right? But the rest were much more likely to be really looking into doing automation. Unfortunately, so my background's in survey research. So the first thing that guessed my mind was like, well, who did they ask to take the survey, right? Because my guess is they didn't do a random sample of people working at any company out there. And so I don't think this is probably the overall representation of all businesses. It might have been limited to maybe bigger corporate 500 type size businesses. But it's still a good indication that, the world everyone knows the world's going to automation, right? The more and more you can automate, the more efficient you'll be. So it was just one thing, a graph I found that I thought was interesting.
Yeah, sure is.
And this again was from that study, and it was talking about some of the misconceptions. And one was that, so I'm putting in desktop automation, even though it was really about robotics process automation. But it's, some people think you're only doing it, your whole goal is to try to basically lay off employees, right? And that's definitely not the case. Which of course is the same thing as trying to save money, which that's not, it's a driver, absolutely, but that's more often than not, that's not the case. And definitely in the case of AutoHotkey versus the robotics process automation, you're not entirely replacing, a person holistically, right? It's you're going to reduce the amount of workload that person has to do on that process they're doing.
Yeah, I'd say that when all of the small stuff that I've done where I've automated it, I've also, of course, started with a small part of it and maybe ended up with something that was close to fully automated and could be said to actually be kind of a robotic process automation type thing, where I might put it on simply a scheduled task that would happen as soon as the computers was left alone or something like that. But still, it has never impacted my own position at the company. It only helps because I could take on other tasks.
Right.
And perhaps it's because I've never worked at a place where there wasn't other tasks to be done. I always seem to be working at a place where people are scrambling around trying to get everything done on time.
Well,
so it always seems like this.
And I think that's exactly why the world's going more and more to automating what you can, because everyone, of course, you're always more and more time crunch to get your work done, right? And they pile more on you. They might lay off one person. They don't hire a new person. They just absorb that into the other people's roles. And so the more that you can streamline and not do by hand, manually, the better, right?
Yeah.
So here we're getting into the real specifics about AutoHotkey, right? And Jackie and I were talking about this. Basically, here are some things about why, I threw this out in the forum quite a while ago of like, why isn't AutoHotkey like the most amazing thing in the world to so many more people? Because it is super easy to pick up, right? There are so many things you can do right away. But I have tried introducing AutoHotkey, I'd say, I'm going to guess to, I don't know, maybe around 60 people. And the adoption rate is really low, sadly. And of course, it could be because I suck, right? I'm open to that. But here are some of the other things that came to mind was like, one is, the older the person is on average, right? The less likely they're willing to change and to try a new thing and to learn something, right? I think that's human nature. One is they just don't realize, they don't even think that like what they're doing could possibly even apply. And that's, Jackie and I were talking about one of the best things to do is figure out something that they do, a pain point for them, and show them, look, what if we did this, right? And I like the description, the magic redo buttons, or John Ford, a guy that he likes AutoHotkey, he's in China, but he calls it think of it as your magic fingers in the background doing exactly what you're doing, right? And I'm like, it's a good visual, I think, to help people to think about more often than not, you're actually replicating what you physically did, right? It's still happening. It's just the computer's doing it instead of you.
Yeah. And that's been one of the things that I've tried to also tell people. It doesn't really matter what the task is. If it involves you doing the same thing each time you do it, you could automate just a part of it. You don't need to automate the entire process. Yeah. But some of it, let's say you need to go to a specific web page or specific app that you use at work or whatever it might be, and grab some data or download something in Excel or whatever it might be, and then you need to work on it. Then why do you have to manually log into it, find the right page, type in the search criteria, and then press download, when all of that could be automated for you?
Jackie, so right on that, one of the first real things I implemented with web scraping was I had this process when I was doing email campaigns. I'd have to log into the tool, give the campaign a name, create a list, and each time I'd have to hit next page, upload a list, hit next page, tell it what type of thing it was, next page, do all that stuff. And even when I focused and did it as fast as I could, it was like 7-minute process, right? When I converted it to web scraping, it was like 30 seconds at the most. And it was because you can detect right when that page is done loading, act, and click the button and act. And that never crossed my mind that like even that slight hesitation on each page of me kind of having to look for it and click it and do whatever, it's the same damn thing every time, right? I mean, or if it's this, then it's going to be that. And so it was like, wow, it really, I was thinking it was just going to relieve me to have to do it, but the speed crunch was just incredible.
Yeah. But again, people don't think about what a computer can be taught, not really taught, but told. So if they think that it's dynamic what they're doing, but I need to type in a new date each time, or I need to make sure that it's between here and here. But if it's still a set thing that you do that has a definitive definition for what it is that you're doing, then you can also tell a program what that is, and it could be able to do it.
I just saw Joe's comment about referencing my comment about old people. Joe, I don't think I said there's a correlation, I think, with as people get older, they're less likely to change. I hope I didn't say old people, but whatever. I mean, I'm honestly old, right? There are obviously exceptions to the rules. It's just on average, I see people that, the older you get, they're just less likely to be willing to change. It's not every person, right? It's just been my experiences. On average, older people are less likely to adopt new things. But anyway, so I didn't mean to offend anybody.
No, and one of the funny things at work is actually, I'm implementing a totally new IT system at work, and one of the early adopters is actually the person who is the one closest to his retirement. He is the most active. He's the one that's
awesome,
most engaged.
Yeah.
And I did some thoughts about it at one point, and with this one thing, at least, I'm sure it's actually both because he does that probably, and also because this new system actually lets him pass on his knowledge of what he
interesting
has done. So for him, I'm pretty sure.
Let's get back into so the other one. There is a big conception of it's too expensive to do, right? And I've had that from people when I try to tell them I'll help them with something. They think it's going to take me weeks or whatever to automate something, and that's also, I think, with the belief that you're going to do end-to-end automation entirely, right? And it's like, I can do something in minutes that can save you, right then, that day, that hour, a lot of time, and then you kind of baby step into it, doing more and more. This next one is one which is what we touched on earlier about everybody's basically too busy to learn, right? They look at it and go, wow, it's great, but I don't have the time to go learn how to use AutoHotkey. And there's this great story of it's a woodcutter, and he's walking through the forest, and he sees these two guys sawing this tree, and they've been doing it for hours, and he goes up and he says, hey, have you stopped to sharpen the saw? And the guys are like, we don't have time to stop and sharpen the saw. We got to get it down, right? And of course, the moral is like, if you take a little time to sharpen the saw, it'll actually cut faster, than it took you the time to stop and sharpen it. And so that's what I typically do is I've learned that I will automate a little bit, and then it saves me that much time. So next time I do it, I have a little more time to learn a little bit more and automate a little bit more. And it got to where I could spend, 2 hours every day, not working, just learning how to code and learning how to do more. And no one even knew I did it because I had automated so much of my job. This is one I've run into. I think it's hard because, of course, they don't tell you this, but often I'll talk to people, and we've all been in those meetings where you get that glassy-eyed look, and you explain to them and you show them how it works, and they basically just say, yeah, and even though they say yes, they still don't actually get it, right? And they still might say, I'll look at it, but they look at it on their own usually because either pride or they're too embarrassed or whatnot to ask for help. And of course, when you're wholly new to it and you don't do anything with it, it can be frustrating and tough. And so I think that happens a fair amount of time.
Sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you're right about that. I've actually tried it a couple of times, but yeah, I'm really not sure what's best. I've gotten groups to adopt to using what I made and told them how to use it, and I've also tried the one-on-one with actually sitting down and trying to teach people I know should be able to pick it up. One-on-one, and still it doesn't really happen.
Yeah,
I'm unsure.
Why? So a good friend of mine, we've been working with SPSS as a statistical tool, and we've known each other forever now. But for about 10 years, maybe it's less, I had tried to say you should really learn how to use macros in SPSS. And he's like, yeah, that it doesn't apply to me, blah, blah, blah. And for like 10 years, every once in a while, I bring it up and no. And then finally, I basically saw something he did. I converted it to a macro. and then showed him in his own thing, and then he got it, right? And then he instantly adopted them and started doing them. But it was funny. It was like exactly your point, Jackie. You're like, I know this person has the need. I know if they would actually get it, they would love it. And then you're just like, well, why can't I convince like my best friend to just, do I have to hog tie him and just for someone to like watch? Yeah, it is funny. This next one is so painful. I'm curious, and if people in the chat, if you'd like to chime in. I mean, I have heard, I've had several bosses literally tell me not to automate things. And when I was so mad one day, I showed it to Jackie, and it's crazy, right? I mean, I'm saving time, and they're like, don't save time, Joe. That's terrible. Has anyone else run into that experience with?
I've tried it. That's for sure. Yeah. And I can see others as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing is like I had other bosses that would they looked at me as like I was the holy grail, like the golden egg, because they saw the value. And then you have other ones. Yeah. It is so perplexing to me. It's interesting.
I see it. Yeah, I also have done the stealth AHK scripts where I was unsure if I should tell anybody about them. Yeah. And of course I waited and just used them and made more and stuff. And each time I actually had something specific where what I had done really worked reliably. And I told my manager or my boss or my colleague who was doing similar things and stuff like that. I've always gotten positive feedback. But when I just presented the idea,
yeah, that's interesting.
I've gotten hit by this. Yeah. No, we don't need you to automate that. No, so don't do that.
And I saw it's in Jive what you just said. I saw what Adam said. My stats blew everybody out of the water. So in one of my examples, I had automated something. My colleague, was talking to her boss about saying like, how in the world is Joe? She's like, he cranks these things out like nothing. Because I had showed my colleague, she told my boss, well, he's automated that, and that was what. So it's so ironic. It got brought up to my boss because it saved so much time because I was kicking butt, and then my boss says, Joe, don't do that, right? I'm like, it's insane.
Yeah.
Okay, which is why I don't work for them anymore. So the next ones kind of fall under the whole mindset of kind of a short-term versus a long-term, the way you look at things, right? This is the best when I would interview at companies, where they would talk about how I view the world. I said, when I go to a place like Six Flags, and I'm going to go to an amusement park, and I see people driving and they see shady spots, they pull into them right then, right? And I go, well, I think about what time am I getting out? I'm going to get out around 3 o'clock. Where's the sun going to be at 3 o'clock? Okay, I'm going to park over there where it's going to be shady, right? I'm like, I always think it through and look at the long term, because it's just, unless you have a freaking fire, that you have to get done now, it's just, you're wasting time, right? You think like you're being productive, but you're really not. You're just being productive in the short run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
So this is that, and one of my best analogies on this one was the job's too small, right? I had a web page where I would have a list of items, and they were just checkboxes, and I would have to go pick like the first 100, but there were like 1,000 on the page, and so I couldn't say pick the first 100. I'd have to go select them. And so I wrote a script that just said, wait a minute, hit space, and then hit the space bar, which selected it, and then I hit tab, and it would go over and go to the next one, and then hit the space bar. And so I literally wrote like a 3-line loop and said, repeat this 100 times. And it was like 30 seconds to write this thing. And I'm like, oh my God, it was just amazing. But it's still, I did it for probably a couple years before I realized, like, wait a minute, why I'm doing the same damn thing over and over.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that I've found out and I do now is that if I get a task on my table, I immediately think about how I can automate it. And I'm sure that here and there, I actually use more time on automating a task than I might have done just doing it. But compared to all of the other where I actually get that task again, I've saved more time automating tasks than I use on automating smaller tasks. But instead, I don't get bored with the tasks that I take on everything because, hey, I'll just make it fun by automating it.
That's
so
actually,
it
yeah,
can be
right.
could be the most boring thing of clicking and moving and dragging and moving and clicking. But I'll just automate it, and that will make it fun.
That's right. Yeah. At the same time, and that's with this, you think it's a one-time thing, but I realized I would solve the issue like you just brought up. It was, I had this thing, I'd never done it before, but then later I'd be doing something else, and I'd think back on, that I realized I did something like that before, and I could go borrow from that code. And so even though you didn't do exactly the same thing, the process you're replicating is very similar, and so you start building up this incredible library, right, of all the things you can use, and it's just in the long run, again, the more you do, the more time you save. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is another one which we all know, and I see the chats over on the side. It's amazingly fast to develop an AutoHotkey for a lot of stuff. Don't get me wrong, Jackie and I both, it's the end all be all perfect solution to every, it's not the perfect tool for everything, but a lot of stuff it's great for.
Yeah, and even people who know lots of other languages will also tell you that you can make almost anything that you need to have run on Windows in AutoHotkey because of all of the things that are there now. Of course, very, very low stuff like drivers and stuff like that you could probably not make, but there's been made servers and everything else, whatever you could think of. And of course, AutoHotkey might need a lot of extra hoops and loops to actually do the thing. So it might not be the best tool for it, but you could do it if that's what you know.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this earlier, I believe, but the whole, you don't have to automate the entire process, right? Yeah. Some people think, no, I need this done now. And I'm like, yeah, but you know what? I can baby step into it. I can automate a little bit this time. Next time it comes up, I'll automate a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. I've used that.
Yeah. This next one came up. It was a good thing. That was that call with Tank where he mentioned, look, after you've automated this process and you actually create logs that you could never have before, that you can automate building in there what happened, and then later you can go mine that data, right? And I'm like, it's other things that are going to be a result by automating it that you're not thinking about. Like that is actually a great benefit to start understanding where the headaches are, how many things you're getting from certain, classifying them in certain ways. Besides the whole, employees are happier and getting more done. And one I just realized. It probably should have been in here, and even though it sort of isn't, but in that discussion with the whole why doesn't AutoHotkey, why isn't it like Automate This or some of the other big robotic process automation tools, was it doesn't have a GUI, right? It's you can make GUIs, of course, and then there's the macro recorder, which it sort of can often help give you at least the structure, but it's, you got to, more often than not, you probably should be coding, right? Not using the GUI. And unfortunately, I think for complete noobs, it is one reason why people don't borrow it. Because, Jackie, I think we were talking the other day, you were saying the second you bring up code, people who aren't coders, it's like it's the Matrix. I should have thought of that when we were talking, right? It's all these jumbles of things, and they're like, I can't follow that. And you're like, it says message box, hello. I mean,
yeah. And again, it's the same. It could be an Excel VBA macro or whatever. Yep. It doesn't really matter. As soon as it's text on the screen that does an action, they kind of shut off.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I just saw the thing about also no multi-big gig studios to install. So that was not that particularly, but that was the thing with Python also, is like, holy cow, learning on a Windows computer what version to install, where it's going to install, the 64 versus 32, and then version 2.7 versus 3, whatever, and then in finding each library, because that was like virtually nothing comes with Python, and you have to get different libraries, and then when you go to share it, it was just like, holy crap, it was complicated.
Yeah, one of the things, and you know that I do this. I'm very bad at actually reusing what I do. So I might use a lot of time on one specific task, and then I totally forget about it and stop using it myself, which is just weird when I've already automated it. And then I will go and automate something differently. And one of the things that put me off with Python was that it was always pushed forth in a way that, hey, if you're gonna do this, you need to use this person's pre-written library that does all of this stuff. Just like when you do, let's say, GDI plus stuff, Tilk has already written a library for it with some functions. And in Python, as an example, that would be everything. Each time you wanted to do something, you didn't need to learn Python. You needed to learn that previous person's way of thinking.
Yeah.
And that put me off. Because, yeah.
You know, I'm gonna make a note to myself here. So I'll flesh that out more before I send out the resources, but I want to insert that in here. All right. So given we're still on the whole, how do we get more people to adopt AutoHotkey, right? So this is really people that maybe you work with, your friends and colleagues, or like I try to, you know, just I'm an evangelist, try to get more people to just automate the mundane. One is that I realized this is part of my guilt was, and I would set up an hour-long meeting, and I would say, here, let me show you a lot of what AutoHotkey does, and I would show them, you know, web scraping and API calls and hot strings and hotkeys and regular expressions, and just I didn't show them the code. I showed them using it. But in hindsight, I'm like, you know, I should have just said, why don't I show you how hot strings work? Right, and keep it super, super simple and very specific, or especially, as we chatted about earlier, find a problem they have and tailor the conversation to that specific thing on what it is that they're trying to do. And then don't necessarily solve the entire thing, but give them a week or two to play with it, right? Because I think people, because that was the other thing, I would write programs and give them people that would have, like, let's say 8 or 10 hotkeys in them. But of course, when you try to learn 10 hotkeys at one time, you can't remember any of them, right? And so it's like, you know, give them 2 at a time, and they can probably remember them and adapt them, and then slowly add to it over time.
Yeah. I had a company I worked at one point where a few of my colleagues were set on a task where they needed to copy from one field to another field, but in 2 different windows. And the thing that you needed to copy couldn't actually be selected. So you couldn't actually copy it via the clipboard. So what they did was they actually took pieces of paper and started writing the stuff down, and then switching over to the other window and then typing it in. And when I saw that, I was kind of like, but how about some of these text scrapping tools? Maybe if we're lucky, that text is actually still something that you can get to programmably. And you could. And I immediately said, oh, give me 5 minutes and then I'll write something for you. Yeah. And it was widely adopted across the entire company because it was apparently something that a lot of people actually did.
Huh.
It was such a small thing, and it ended up actually giving me a lot of credit.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, and that was by just looking at what some of my colleagues were actually doing of manual labor.
You know, it's funny because that is exactly what got me into using AutoHotkey, right? I refused to just manually do something over and over and over. I'm like, there's got to be a better way.
I think it was when we talked the other day, or it was near that at least, where I saw a Bill Gates quote of him saying, I will always find the most
Lazy.
lazy person to actually do the task, because he will find the quickest, easiest way of doing it.
Yeah.
And you might not be able to directly put it into this, but at least still it's still kind of the general idea of it.
Yep. All right. So then there's also, which is, it's still on topic, right? The same thing, but curtail what you teach them. If they're Luddites, if they're, not adopting technologies, that keep it super simple. Stick with hotkeys and hot strings. If they're somewhat nerdy, right? They get technology, they just haven't been introduced to it. You might show them like how you can use an input box to collect some data and incorporate that into your script, or sending keystrokes so you can have it jump around and do stuff, or maybe do some, move around files or manipulate, right? Which are some things that a little bit more advanced people might do. And then nerds, that would be, to me, at least your first one is very specific of like, you're trying to do an API call and you're having to do all this stuff. You know what? We can do that, really easy with AutoHotkey, or regular expressions, right? Or GUIs too. GUIs are overall, I suck at them, but compared to other languages, I think AutoHotkey is pretty simple to create GUIs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had no predisposition about anything AutoHotkey or any other programming language at all. So when I got into AutoHotkey, I was like, yeah, okay, GUIs, okay. Looking at the documentation, you make them this way. It seemed okay. It was structured well enough for me, at least. And after that, I'm hearing that GUIs just sucks. They're just so hard, and compared to whatever Delphi or whatever might be better at actually doing GUIs than AutoHotkey. But then when you then actually dig into it, it seems like other languages are just plain bad at it. And I don't feel that AutoHotkey is bad at making GUIs.
You know what? So for about a year, I went to Python meetups. And so these guys, almost everyone there were some that were new like me, but they were hardcore. They were Python programmers. And there was about 50 of them, right? And I would talk to them. One is, I was amazed how many of them actually had used AutoHotkey at some point, but stopped using it. But a lot of them, because I was trying to work with GUIs, I'm saying, how, have you used, I don't program in GUIs. They're a whole different animal. And then I finally realized, and after I started getting at least manageably not terrible at them, I realized it's because in my normal script, I know the exact flow, right, of where you're coming in at and where you're going, versus a GUI, you can be coming in at different spots, right? And that was, once I grasped that, it helped a lot with me building GUIs. But anyway, yeah. So the next one is, often, and this is where I've run into my boss, like your boss might look at what you're doing is actually costing them money. Like they think it's going to take you so long to automate something. They want you to get your work done, versus you go up like a director or a VP level, they see this cost savings, right? They'll even find a budget to pay for you to remove you from your group maybe, and then to, you're going to spread out your stuff to everybody. It's a cost savings, not a cost expense. And so that's why I try to get the more senior person involved in the thinking about automating thing. And then of course there's also your colleagues. Some of them might think that you're trying to automate them out of a job, which is, I'm like, I'm trying to make your life easier, not do the mundane stuff. And of course IT, which is, we all know people, the IT departments cannot like this at all, for some reasons, especially hot strings and passwords, right? Which is what I used a ton of them for, because it drove me nuts.
Yeah, at work, I'm not allowed to install anything on my computer, which is one thing. I still use AutoHotkey just fine, but still, the thing is, if I actually run the AutoHotkey to exit file, then, and first when I run it, then the security system actually goes in and quarantines it. So I can't compile scripts on my work computer because it just will not be allowed to actually run. So what I often do is I use TeamViewer or something else and log on to my home computer and actually compile it there and then just drag it over. It works just fine. Nothing there. But it's weird. Some of the things where, and you can see it on the forums as well, they're only allowed to use the version of AutoHotkey from, let's say, 2011, because at one point someone nodded at that and said that's okay. So they can only use AutoHotkey Basic at their work because it's the only allowed application.
Huh.
And it's just like, it's weird when companies are so still set on which programs you can actually use. It's weird to me.
This last one I think we already talked about is don't try to automate everything. Create something. So that was the example I gave also a while ago. It's like, write something specific to their needs that does that, but don't incorporate everything, and then come back later and kind of add in some tweaks to it. So before, I think the next slide, we're going to get into making money with AutoHotkey. But before I do that, I have a poll here, and hopefully this is popping up on your screens. And if you guys could, it's 3 questions, right? 2 of them are about this topic, and the next one, just since it was easier to have one poll, was what do you want the next topic on? I unfortunately, in this format, I couldn't do an open-end comment. So if you have ideas for the next webinar, write it in the chat. Dun, dun, dun,
Yeah, I'm just looking at your questions here, Joe.
Yeah.
Which seemed just fine. Yeah, what's a good idea? What do I want? What do we want the next topic to be, Joe? What did you answer for that question?
I don't think I can actually take it because I'm I don't know. The Outlook, I've been doing more and more with Outlook, and so that's why I thought, we could have another one talking about using COM and feature Outlook is the one.
One of the interesting things about COM and Outlook is that for one of the actual Office programs where you have access to all of these COM commands, but you don't have a macro recorder.
Yeah, that's right.
You have in Word and you have it in Excel, and a lot of people use that for doing small stuff.
Yeah.
But in Outlook, you don't have access to that.
Yeah.
So it's a great one to actually use AutoHotkey's COM on.
Right. I think everyone else, because I know we've had this conversation, but if you guys didn't get it, but it's, in Excel, you can say, I'm going to record a macro, and then you go and do it, and then you hit stop, and you can literally go see the VBA code, right? And then you tweak it to AutoHotkey, but it's very similar in syntax. But in Outlook, that's not available.
Yeah, exactly. Need to write it from scratch. Yeah. And then you can just as well do it in AutoHotkey because you need to go look everything up as well. Okay,
I'm going to end polling here. We got 12 out of 17, which is good. 70%, yay. Yeah. And then I think I'm going to share results so everyone can see this. Now, can you guys see it on your screen? So
nice. So that's a 50-50 one. That's a good amount of people actually getting paid to develop AutoHotkey code outside of their main.
Good. Yeah. And it looks like we got some decent votes for parsing XML and Outlook and troubleshooting. Yeah, this is one. Maybe we'll just tag it on the other one and just say that for the second hour, which is what we always do, but we'll make it more of an emphasis that bring your problems and we'll try to fix some stuff.
Absolutely.
Cool. Okay. All right. So let me close that up and on to the next one. Making money with AutoHotkey. All right. So these things kind of overlap, right? So I couldn't find a good, easy way to break them out completely because they're not exclusive of each other. But in general, right, there's kind of 3 overall concepts of I'm going to write a program that is generic enough that I can sell it to a large audience, right? And you put it out there, and we have some stuff about licensing, about how you're going to do that. But it's something so generic. My one example is pasting plain text, right? And I know there's tools out there that do that. But that is one of the things almost anybody could have a hotkey that I can paste plain text instead of, rich text or HTML. Oh, that's helpful. that could have a pretty big mass audience. Of course, the price would be small on that, but that describes that one. Then you're going to make a custom script based on an individual or a company's need, right? Which that often does come up as well, where you're solving specific problems for them, but it's not going to have a mass appeal. So you're going to have to charge more for that. And then there's the getting paid to code, where basically they're hiring you think of it as a subcontractor, and you're getting paid for your hours, right? You're not getting paid for the end product necessarily, and whether it works great or not, right? I mean, it probably has to work some. But when they make tweaks to it and everything, that's on them to pay you more.
Yeah, we also got in the chat, there's also receiving donations for freeware apps.
Yeah, well, I structured, it's fine, right? That's why I said there's no real clear way of this, but it's making things up. These are the ways I was like, how you actually collect the money. And so I kind of broke them down into there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's obviously you're making, generally speaking, that I think that more often than not comes under this one, right?
Yeah.
Because not many people are going to write things and then hope people donate when it's only a small audience that's using it.
Yeah, yeah. But as you said, this is not selling. Yeah. But of course, yeah, the selling part, but it's still a generic program that you're getting paid for having made. So yeah, sure.
So once you figure out, and of course each of these, and I mean, I think all of us can intuitively understand a lot of the pros and cons of each of these approaches, right? It depends on what you're trying to do. This just, I think, giving you a framework of like, do I want to try to write something that has a broad appeal that I can just put out there, versus talking to specific people, solving their issues, and being more as a consultant, right? Where you're going to be maybe even on site for a little bit, or that you have access to their websites or whatnot, and automate something for them.
Yeah, I'd say that I've done all three of those, and currently I'm on the first one. I'd say the selling of a generic program to a larger audience. That's working just fine for me at the moment. But I've also been at the two others, and I'd say maybe the very first one I actually tried out, that was being paid to code. Someone, he wanted me to do something for a specific need he had, and he wanted to pay me by the hour. And he asked, how long will that take you, and what do you need? What's your price an hour? And we got to a point where we were mutually in agreement, and I started coding and sent him the stuff, and he paid me for the hours I used. But when I actually read up on the topic, all of the guides and all of the kind of guidance, if you would say that, would go for you actually setting a set price for the project. So as to not, you needed to think about how many hours will you actually use and stuff like that. But if you wanted to make a true profit, their overall idea was for you to say, hey, I need, let's say, $500 to code this for you. And then you would use any number of hours on it. And if you actually had made your calculations correctly, you would make some kind of profit off of that.
So back to that point, typically I'd say is you say, oh, I think it's going to take me 10 hours, right? So then add like 30%, right? Mm-hmm. No matter what, you're like, it always takes longer than you think. And that's where I was telling Jackie, I actually fired a client a couple weeks ago because I had said, I'll do this for $300. And then he kept coming back with these change. I'm like, no, we discussed this and you wanted this and I did this. And then he just had all these other things. I'm like, that's fine, but that'll be extra. But he still, and it was like, you know what, it's just not worth my time. So it is there's a potential for making some good money, but at the same time, you got to keep a wrangle on the client and saying, I'm going to deliver you this, right? And you're signing off on this, and any alterations, those are out of scope, and, you need to pay more. And also, like, that guy never paid me, right? Even though I delivered what he initially asked for, which I was still fine with because I'm like, I'm just done. It's not worth the back and forth of my time. It's a sinking ship.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another thing. That's what I've, at least at the beginning, I was very distrusting of people actually paying me for my work, because I hadn't done that type of stuff
Yeah.
before. I had had a job and I was paid a monthly salary, and that was that. So whereas here I was actually sending them my work before them actually paying me.
Yeah.
So I was very interested in actually doing it in steps. So here is the first part. I used 2 hours on this. And then when they paid me that amount, then I would continue on and, let's say, code for 2-3 hours more and get paid for that. And when then I saw the money kept coming, when I said I had used whatever, then I might make it into bigger and bigger chunks, because I trusted
Sure. That's
them
right.
more
It's a
and more.
relationship you've established. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Whereas,
So we're getting close to the end of the first hour, so I wanted to try to the next couple slides are pretty quick to discuss, but here, and like I said, I'll email out these resources. But there's, like, if you're doing a one-time fee or monthly or yearly, like you have service licensing, right? You need to somehow protect yourself from people just stealing it and sharing it with everybody. Here's one tool that Jackie actually showed me, I believe, the Easy Digital Download. So if you're using WordPress, and even if you're not using WordPress, if I remember right, they have an API you can connect to. But you can basically need a way to track, who has a license, or you can build it in there. There's also the whole thing you could do, like a hardware footprint or software, looking at things on that specific computer, right? And that can be used to create an algorithm that looks for a value, and then you store that value. And then you can use like some sort of a social login, right? You could tie it to, they have to log into their Facebook account, right? And then you can, after they log into that, it's the odds of them sharing their Facebook username and login with a lot of people are probably pretty small. Of course, they still could make up a whole fake one and then share that. But these are just some ways that you can try to restrict the people just sharing away your program.
yeah.
And then here are some of these are just straight up how you get money, right? But Freelancer, Donation Coder, Code Canyon, Flatter, Fiverr, Upwork. Those are ones where you can literally try to sell your code, I believe. I should have organized them. This was a PowerPoint thing. They just didn't fit in right. So anyway, and then of course you can collect from PayPal, Patreon, Bitcoin. You can use. There's a lot of other wallet type things you can do to get money, but these are two. But those are places where you can how you'd collect your fees, right? Is if you want to do it online. Yeah. Thanks, John. That was the other one, which gets back to your mention about having, and Jack and I chatted about this the other day. Having the whole shareware, freeware donations in a link where you're like, hey, if you like what I did, donate. Buy me a cup of coffee, do this or that. Unfortunately, this is my feeling. Right, is with the AutoHotkey audience, I'm giving you guys, I put out some code. Someone might be able to borrow, and they're probably still going to tweak it or they're going to use it, but they're coders, right? And some of them will give you some money, but a lot of them are like, well, I'm only paying for this little, why would I pay for this little bit? And there's other things out there. Versus if your whole target audience are those Luddites, right? That don't even, it's not an AutoHotkey script. It's a program. It's an executable they've downloaded and they use. They really feel like they owe you something, right? So I think even then, I think the incidence rate is probably low, but I think for the general audience, it's probably higher to get donations from that audience than it is from the AutoHotkey audience for giving them snippets of code versus an executable program.
Sure. I truly love this way of doing it, as we talked about, the real way of actually being able to lean back at one point and just seeing your work making money for you. That would be in the generic programs part.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Because that was the other one. This one, Jackie and I both, we neither of us necessarily like to code, right? I like solving problems, don't get me wrong, but the actual programming side of things, it's not something I really want to do for a living, right? And that's where you're like, I want something that like can have a passive income. That would be awesome. And so that's where I put my head around this one, or this one, right? Where you're like, so a good audience I've been doing stuff for is real estate. So here's another, actually, you know what, and let me go on to the next screen. Rich target audience, and I should have put it in here. All right, so salespeople, right? Real estate is one I've been doing stuff for. So this is the whole like, well, what are commonalities where you actually are audiences where you can make money, right? You can find, let's start with the bottom since I was there. Salespeople, like on LinkedIn and stuff, people who work in sales. LinkedIn is, to me, it's a really crappy website to actually use to generate sales. And so trying to automate how they use it and things they can do is a great time saver. And people that work in sales live off of making, you know, their sales, right, and commissions. And they have money. They're willing to spend it, right? It's a good thing. And so don't think just LinkedIn, but just, can you solve people's problems that like work in sales, right? Or real estate's another one where there's a huge profit margin for people that sell real estate, right? So those people have money. So one of the I'd say is think about people who make good money, and often they're willing to spend it.
Yeah, one of the largest customers I had, at least, where I was working with him for many months, and he kept the money flowing, so to speak. He was actually in sales, and I was making something for him that made it easier for him to get the sale closed. And for him, each time I made that simpler for him, he made more sales. And
yeah. So yeah, like email alone, right? Following up, like I wrote a program that'll scan your entire Outlook, all of your folders, and it keeps track of, you know, who was the last, how many emails you've received from a person and when the last date was. And so the thought was like, you know what, we could tell people, salespeople, who do I do a lot of emails with, yet in the last 6 months I haven't exchanged emails with them. I should ping them with an email, checking in, right? So we generate that list, and then of course automate a personalized email to those people saying, hey Fred, you know, personalized, just checking in, I haven't heard from you in a while, right? Type of stuff like that. Things like that, they just would eat up.
Yeah, someone in the chat just mentioned Fiverr or Fiverr or
Yep.
whatever way you would point it. I used that at one point a little as well, because for the most part, $5 doesn't seem like that much, and you have entire companies on there actually selling a simple service piece for only $5. And a lot of the world, or some of the more established parts of it at least, can easily spend $5 on what they feel is a mundane task. But to other people, it's a fair amount of money at least. And I think we will see that all around the world.
Having said, and I agree with you, Jackie. I used it for creating, actually, this logo down here. I paid someone on Fiverr, and I forget what their deal. It was something like for $15, I get 3 logos, if I remember right, something like that. And so it wasn't 5. Was my first point, right? The other thing is I actually gave the guy like 30, because to me, to Jackie's point, you know, even $15, I'm like, because I had revisions, you know, and I'm like, I feel guilty. So Fiverr, I think you can make some money, but it definitely, I agree when you see other people saying like, I'll do that for free. Let's like look at the forum, right? And don't get me started on that whole thread on the forum about having a section where maybe we could at least say we're interested to get paid to code, right, on the forum, which is fine if it's not there. It's just, to me, I don't understand not having it. all right, whatever.
Yeah. That's the commission subform.
Yeah.
Yeah, but as he said here, but what kind of coding work can you do for $5? And yeah, I totally agree with that, because compared to the salary in Denmark and stuff like that, and the way I normally would see my time being worth, but to someone in, let's say, India or South Korea or wherever the salaries are low enough, $5 might actually be worth
Hey, yeah.
a day's work.
But the
So
other thing is, I had this conversation with the guy that was paying money. It's like, you know, don't also don't do it for $5, right? So you don't get the work, but just say, look, you get what you pay for, right? You might get someone $5 to sending a keystroke that will move your mouse in a certain direction, but that's not the most robust, easy, you know, optimized way. And I would just say, hold your guns, put a profile out there, try to explain to people how you solve problems, that you're worth more than $5, right? But you offer a much more robust solution. I saw one on web scraping the other day, and I'm like, I think it was web scraping, but I'm like, you know, there's probably an API for doing what you're trying to do, and it is by far the way to go about, you know, what they were trying to do. So again, I'm trying to cruise through this. This is a really important one, though. You know, you got to have, when you're thinking about what problem you're solving, right? There's got to be like logical reasons. When it's a more involved process, you know, the logic that actually, you know, if X happens, then this Y I need to do, and if W happens, then Z I need to do. But the structured data, right? The more data is structured and how you access it is structured, the better processes you can automate. And then lots of repetitive transactions. So think of also, Jackie and I talked about this before with the online support, right? And how often do they write the same things over and over? And I know a lot of them do use probably some built-in type programs to help. Hi, good morning, how are you? Right? I don't think most people are writing that.
I'd say that for the most of, let's say, the websites that I do have, when I actually end up asking support for something, because for some reason I can't access my cPanel, or they moved parts of whatever subdomain I had there, or whatever it might be. As soon as I log into the chat interface, when one of the supporters actually takes my call, so to speak, I get this generic message, and my name is in there and everything, but I can totally see that's totally something that's automated, and still it then takes almost 2 minutes for them to actually come on there.
That's funny,
and answer whatever I said.
Good morning, Jackie. Good. How are you doing? Is it a nice day there? You're right. Yes. And then 2 minutes later, you're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna review your file.
Yeah, exactly.
This other one, and we'll get to the next slide here, but just obviously, which is what we alluded to earlier, right? Non-programming business people, right? They are the ones that are more willing to, I think, pay money to solve their problem than people who are actually coders. Right. This next one is some of the things that when you are trying to pitch the idea, right? What should you mention as the incentives or benefits to potential clients? So this is much more where you're like a consultant, right? The employee man-hour savings, right, is going to give you a higher return on investment, obviously. Better quality, right? If you can, once it's now, of course, when you first do it, you might have some errors and they'll be consistently wrong, right? But once you tweak it and fix it, it's going to be a lot higher accuracy than if a person's doing it. And the other one I always say is like, look, you don't have to automate the entire thing and it submits it. You can automate the process and have a human look at it, eyeball it, go, yeah, we're good, and submit it. The other thing
that comes to what we talked about earlier about not having to actually automate all of the tasks. You don't need to take it from 0 to 100%. You could get it 80% of the way, and then like an employee or customer or whatever take it.
I'd say the vast majority of what I do is at the most it's like 95% of the way, because I always like having that little bit of like, when I'm doing a multi-step process, I want to make sure like, oh, I'm good before I, finalize it. but your customers, right? When it takes you less time to respond and take action and stuff, their customers are going to be happier, right? In the long run.
Yeah.
Scalability is nice. So let's say it starts getting busy, because now I've automated that process, right? I can easily take on even more work, and because it's compressed the time it takes to do it, it's not so hard for me to be able to do more, right? No. And of course, I was always much happier, as we talked earlier, Jackie. I'm like, I'm a lot happier. I'm not doing the mundane, sucky tasks of clicking, and over and over and over.
Yeah. That's a good one to get out.
It is. The metadata we discussed, those are basically the log files that you can analyze after, right? Which that is getting into like the kind of big data type era where you can look at what's going on and understand where errors are happening, or what, how many your calls from getting from certain locations and or whatnot on certain topics, and mine the words that are in it, right? Because it's all captured.
Mm-hmm.
And this is more for you, is like, the more you do, the easier it gets. And the more that you automate, the more time you have to automate.
Yeah, I've used that a lot. As soon as parts of a task is actually automated, I know that, hey, usually that this takes. They know that I'll have this ready tomorrow, because it takes an entire day to do it. And then I've automated, let's say, 4 hours of it down to a few minutes. Then I actually know that, hey, it doesn't matter that I used 2 hours and then just deliver this at the end of the day instead of tomorrow morning. I'll still get it done earlier, but I had 2 more hours to actually learn more or automate even more of that process.
Right. Yeah, I think they're called fuses on Outlook. You can schedule your email to be delivered at a certain time. Mm-hmm. And so I would literally get my work done, and then I'd write the email and I put it on a fuse to send it at 4 hours later, right? I'm like, oh, they don't need to know that I did this in 4 minutes, right? I'm like, it's yeah. Okay, so that was what we have for the overall, at least in the deck. I'm gonna bear with me here. I'm gonna stop the recording.